Comes out in June. There has to be at least a 30-day public comment period. And public comment, I'm going to call, frankly, I already know I'm going to call for at least 60-day public comment. This continues to be a very important, complicated issue. And then those public comments, just as the 14,000 public comments that came in last year, are all going to have to go back to the DEC for review. We're talking probably about a year's extension here at this point. That's what the current executive order says, that Patterson put in place, that Cuomo has continued. And, you know, the only way of possibly strengthening it, that executive order, is to do some of what Walter Hang is suggesting on his website, which is to nail down that language more specifically in terms of, you know, what does it mean for wastewater? What does it mean for cumulative impacts and so on? I support that effort. I signed that, and I've encouraged others to do the same.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for doing the work on trying to deal with the taxes on the wealthy in our state. My question is stimulated a little bit from what Harmony said. Is there anybody in Albany articulating a vision that you're excited about?
Yeah, that's a vision I have too.
Uh-oh.
I want to be fair. I don't think so. You know, people do in private, but in terms of major figures publicly, I'd say there's not much vision. I don't think there's much vision in the country as a whole, never mind just Albany. Name me people nationwide that are articulating a democratic vision for our country and a positive vision for our country. Do you know of anyone that's in the political arena? I mean, there are a few. There are a few.
Barbara Lifton.
You know, most of them are in the pundit. Most of them are, you know, I mean, I'm talking about Robert Reich, for instance. I was saying, his recent column was great. You know, Sanders is great. You know, Howard Dean. I like Howard Dean and what he has to say. But no, our leaders. Let's face it. We have our country's become very, very much moving towards you know, the dominance of corporations in our public life. It's very worrisome to me. I think political leaders have taken on a lot of that rhetoric, corporate rhetoric about what we ought to be doing and how we ought to be doing it. We hear it with schools all the time. We talk about running schools like businesses and teachers, you know, all the discussion. And let's set up competitions and they'll compete for the funds. And, you know, these are business concepts. And let's get teachers competing with each other. They'll be better teachers. And I keep saying, no, teaching is a cooperative venture. It's not a business venture. It's not a competitive venture. And teachers competing, they don't share good things. We want teachers to share their best stuff with each other. If one's going to get, you know, $500 more a year, and that's all we're talking about, folks, in terms of merit pay, you know, a few $100s. This is not real money. Maybe they'll not share their good stuff with another teacher. Is that what we really want happening in our public schools? So we have the ethic of corporations and business being applied to the public sector that aren't supposed to be. There's a reason there's government in the public sector and there's business. There's a reason that they're separate. They live with separate, different values, and they're both legitimate values. Business is fine. They have a purpose. Corporations are fine. They have a purpose. But government also has a purpose, and they're not the same. But we keep talking about them as if they're the same.
So I have a question about, I'd like to know what people who would like to support this notion of keeping the tax rate kind of where it is for higher income earners, where it is, or even to raise it a little bit. And I would also like you to comment on something, because I really don't know what power the state might have over this. But we keep talking about income, people that have certain income levels and the tax that they get. I'd like to know what, if any, power the state would have over bonuses in the financial services industry. And I really can't let this go, because I have to be honest, when I come to these meetings and I listen to people and speak to people in Ithaca, it's all this big, sick, cosmic joke to me. Because once again, you know, the people who were not responsible are having to bail out those who were more responsible. I don't say this as a crazy left-wing person. I have plenty of friends in the financial services industry. I have nothing against banking at all. I don't want to go on a big tangent, but my main thing is this. That industry would not exist if they did not get bailed out of tax money. And this economic crisis, from every report that was just completed, from if you just look at the straight math, we bailed them out. and they're taking these bonuses. In a lot of ways, they're taking these bonuses that are only earned because of unbelievably low-rate loans that they got from the government.
Zero in some cases, right?
In some cases, zero. And the last thing I want to say about that...
And then we're borrowing it back from them. Did you know that?
I did. And I have to say, because this is something that, when I talk about this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to sit around here and argue for scraps. And a lot of people in my generation are feeling that's what we've been left with.
Right.
We're supposed to,
that's
if
what's
you
happening.
decide not to go into banking, consulting, start your own businesses or anything like that, or go into law, corporate law in particular, you are supposed to fight for scraps the rest of your life and argue. And everyone that I speak to, just so you know, when we have these discussions, we are losing our minds over all of our representatives who are allowing this to get paid out as we argue over whether union teachers make too much and nonsense in Madison, or which youth program we should support. So I would like to know what can be done, and not even realistically, what do we have to do? Whose life do we have to make a living hell in order to make sure that this money isn't just given away again while we all struggle for the rest of our lives?
Well, thank you. You know, we're in this mess because of the collapse of Wall Street. I was hoping, and I said, you know, the people in we have a lot of very wealthy people in our state, mostly in the New York City area. New York City, Westchester, Long Island, around the city, are sort of the corporate elite of Wall Street and many corporations. Many of them, I won't say every one, but many of them were part of arguing for deregulation of Wall Street. Many of them pushed Clinton and his administration, Robert Rubin and all of those, Larry Summers, to deregulate Wall Street. They said, trust us. We'll do the right thing. You don't need to regulate us. And the federal government said, okay, hands off. We'll let you put together these crazy financial instruments, and we won't worry too much about what you're doing. The SEC was sitting there and doing next to nothing. And I said, so they did that. They got it. They made it happen. Then they benefited from that tremendously, making hundreds of millions of dollars, often billions of dollars. So they got the deregulation, they benefited from it, and then they messed up really badly. They did a lot of damage to our state, to our country, to the world, a tremendous amount of damage. We all bailed them out. The federal taxpayers, we all got together and bailed them out. They're doing okay again, you may have noticed. Billions of dollars, again, back in riding high. Goldman Sachs, just $10 billion in bonuses out from Goldman Sachs. The average worker got $660,000 bonus in end-of-year income. They're probably all, 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds? $666,000 on average at Goldman Sachs. They're doing okay again. I said in conference, I want to tax them. But we certainly ought to tax them to help clean up the mess they made. That's what I said in our conference. That we have the power to do. We have that power, and we should use that power. Because a lot of these billionaires, we see the Koch brothers, they're taking their billions, and they're attacking the government with it. They're attacking the public sector. They're attacking teachers. They're attacking firefighters and policemen with their billions that we're letting them hold on to. It's incredible the way the corporations are working to destroy government, democratic government. Corporations are not democratic. They're not. They're not supposed to be. They're not meant to be. Well, you know, we can talk about that, worker-owned, whatever. Jeff is always, I have to be careful with Jeff in the room. No, but, you know, I mean, I'd like more democratic corporations, but they're not democratic entities. But government's supposed to be democratic. And we're actually supposed to run the show in a democracy. The corporations aren't supposed to be running the show. And I'm concerned that they're running the show way too much. Anyway, I made that argument. I was not alone in believing that we should, last year, have instituted tax reform and done some high-end bracket stuff to start last year and continue this year until this recession is over, certainly, and maybe beyond. Later on in the day, one of my colleagues came up to me and said, Barbara, your problem is that you're being logical. You're being logical. I was told I was being logical. Yeah. So that's where things were last year. And they're pretty much there this year, too. We now have a GOP Senate that's more reluctant than we are, usually, to raise taxes on wealthy New Yorkers. So I share your frustration. We've all got to push back on the federal government. We can ask state government to do some, but states are over a barrel. There's only so much they can do. I don't believe we're going to get, maybe we can push very hard if we get enough people to get at least this $1.3 billion in this year's, if we get this surcharge to not discontinue at the end of this year, it means $1.3 billion more in this year's budget. Not a lot of money considering we're already cutting $8.8 billion in this year's budget. It's a quarter of it, a tiny third, I don't know what it is, a fifth of it, a tiny amount of it, but it's still real money. But next year's budget, which it'll also affect, will raise $5 billion. That's almost the entire problem next year. So we can be here next year having the same discussion about more billions in cuts to state government, or we can say we're going to continue the surcharge. Frankly, again, I'd say we do more. In fact, I said, this is what I said the other day. I said, Obama couldn't get the rollback of taxes that Bush did, the $800 billion that Bush did. The only time, did I say this before? Sorry, I was in Newfield this afternoon. The first time a president had ever cut taxes while going to war. It had never happened before in our history. He cut $8 billion on high-end income taxes. And Obama, of course, was trying to roll them back, didn't get that agreement last year. So that means, that, again, the top 2% of New Yorkers who should have started paying more federal taxes this year, if he'd been able to get that rollback that most of us, I think, agreed should happen, most economists said should happen, that means $8 billion more is staying here in New York that otherwise would have gone to the federal government. $8 billion with the wealthiest 2% of New Yorkers. So they've just gotten a huge windfall from the federal government, averaging $124,000 per family, for a family that makes $200,000 or $300,000 a year and up. I said, I think if I were queen of a state, I would tax every penny of that. I would tax that whole windfall that the wealthiest 2%, who, by the way, remember, got a 50% cut in their state taxes over the last 20 years. I would tax every penny of it, bring it into state coffers, solve our problem, and then those folks get to write it off their federal taxes, and they get a third of it back. Tell me that's not logical. They don't need that money. They don't need that money. They don't. They don't need it. But our school children need it. People need jobs. We need things done. We need things done in the public sector. Infrastructure work. We need to, we need to fund our public education. We got kids that are dying, that are at the door of colleges wanting to go to college and get a college degree. We're not doing it. We're not funding them. They're out on the street. We've got unemployed, and yet we've got stuff that needs doing. We should be taking in that money from in a progressive income tax, as we used to do in this state and in this country, back when we were a prosperous, back when we believed in shared prosperity, back when we had a strong middle class, a growing middle class, instead of a rapidly shrinking middle class, and put that money to work, and at the same time, return the private sector to a robust. Everything is stalled. The fact that government is stalled in this way also stalls the private sector. It is not moving. It is stalled. It's sitting on how much money? $2 trillion? The banks and corporations are sitting on $2 trillion? What's that about? We've cut their taxes by billions and billions and billions. They said, if you do that, we'll create jobs. But they're sitting on $2 trillion. That's not going to work in our economy, and we've got 12% unemployment in this country. By the way, New York is only at 8.2%.